Welcome everyone to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Centre up here in Powell River, BC. And we've been talking about the history of addiction treatment, starting out with Towns Hospital, moving then on to psychoanalysis, and maybe one of the more standout psychiatrists of the time, Harry Tebow, and I say that because of his involvement with Bill Wilson and the 12-step program. But a little more recent version now of treatment would be the Minnesota model. And the Minnesota model is a good model to look at because it is so powerful, even today in the treatment world. Originally developed by Hazelton Treatment Center, and Hazelton got off the ground in 1949, but not quite on a roll until a few years later. But by Hazelton Treatment Center, Wilmar State Hospital, and the Veterans Administration, all in Minnesota. It wasn't called the Minnesota model back then. It would become known as the Minnesota model, I believe, around in the 60s. But anyway, back then a bunch of community-spirited people really wanted to help alcoholics, and frankly, the medicine of the day wasn't very good. I mean, they really didn't know what they were doing to help alcoholics actually overcome this this problem. So, this treatment center became I don't know, in some sense, a testing place. And what they did is they borrowed some of the 12-step program, and then they added in medicine and some psychology, and then at the original level, some religion. Okay, but basically, it was the idea of the Minnesota model, as it's formally stated now, was that it would help the alcoholic or the drug addict attain a measure of physical and mental and emotional stability. But the agent of change, what was actually going to help the addict, was to go then to the 12-step program. So in treatment, they would introduce the clients to the 12 steps and let them work through a few of the steps. But they fully expected after treatment, and then they would just sort of flow into the 12-step program, and it would be the 12-step program that would actually help the individual overcome the addiction. Okay, so that was the logic to it. So treatment, professional treatment, was introduce principles and language of the 12 steps, some meetings, what was it like to go to a meeting, but mainly there just to make sure they ate right and got some, medicine if they needed it. The medical doctors look after them. Okay, so that was the basic idea. So the Minnesota model estimates. Even after, in the 21st century, I've put 93 to 95% of all treatment facilities in the United States are actually based on the Minnesota model. So very powerful. Not so much in Canada. In Canada, we don't put as heavy a weight on the Minnesota model. But in the United States, sort of the code term, by the way, for this is 12-step based. Still remarkably powerful, and so that's why it's important. So if you think about what treatment would be like, and basically if you know something about the 12-step program, then you have an idea about what it's like. So we hear, for example, that the foundation, one of the foundational principles would be humility, right? Which is what Bill Wilson talked about. Humility is underneath all the steps, as Wilson said, right? But a lot of the language we find, this idea that we're powerless over our addiction, all of that would be part of the Minnesota model. Okay, so it's a very, very important model. Now, here's the interesting thing, though, that it didn't really have a big research basis to it, right? If you think about its history, right? Everyone's kind of confused. No one knows what to do. They know about Bill Wilson and the 12-step program, and he's having some success. So they're thinking, well, let's put that in there. So not a real hardcore research basis to this, right? There have been outcome studies done, but really they've been more recent. These have been more recent phenomena, and we've been finding all sorts of things. If you're interested, Scott Tonigan at New Mexico is one of the key figures. He's done a lot of research, and the whole New Mexico team actually is for decades has studied this in depth. But there's a lot of research now The principle of anonymity had made it very difficult to study, but enough people have volunteered now. I think we have a good sense of success rates and things like that. So, but that's the sort of after the fact. So the Minnesota model grew up, was in place, and my own opinion is Hazelden Treatment Center created its own publishing company. So a lot of the material is actually coming down to Hazelden. So if some treatment center needed some material, they would naturally go to Hazelden because they had their own publications, and it was all readily available. So Hazelden, very influential in the 12-step, or in this 12-step based program. At any rate, that's it. So we've gone through Towns Hospital, we've done the psychoanalysis, and we've done the Minnesota model, and we'll look at a little more recent treatment next time.